Okay, well, thank you so much for everyone coming to the Happiness Hour at the Goodness Exchange here. What is it? March 10th, 2022. There's a lot going on in the world. We're going to bring a little bit of light. You know, the darker it gets, the lighter we can get here for 1 hour in our lives. And we have the most amazing guest tonight. Adam Morris and Adam, I don't know about you, but I felt like when we met, we both just fell over a cliff together. We had so much in common, and I was on his podcast and he was on mine, and we we've just I think Adam Morris and I just live, and so many people that I know live in a world of possibility and opportunity instead of a world of threat and deficits. So I want to introduce our guest for this evening, and we can keep this really light, really low stakes, chime in, that sort of thing. Adam Morris is a podcaster in Columbus, Ohio, for a podcast called People Helping People. And if you go back and you look on his website, oh, Adam, I got to ask you about the art because somebody is doing some serious art for your podcast.
My relaxing in the evening.
Is this yours?
Yep, I
Oh
sketch on
my
an iPad and then do watercolor art every day in order to disconnect from the world for a few minutes.
Okay, check out while you're waiting for while I'm introducing Adam, the People Helping People podcast. So, Adam, that makes me even more in love with your work and your way in the world. I got to tell you. So, Adam is shining a light on social enterprise, which for some of us is a word that we commonly use, and for others, I like to frame up social enterprise if I was telling it to my sister. Um, it's a way of doing what you can do in the world to help others. And that the spectrum of that is enormous. But Adam pretty much consistently interviews people who have found a way to take something they know or their zone of genius or their level of mastery and apply it to a project that helps others. So Adam, welcome to the Goodness Exchange. I almost said the Conspiracy of Goodness podcast because I'm looking at your interview on my podcast right over here. So, Adam, start us off on tell us a little bit about your story and describe how you got here tonight.
Yeah, no, I'm so excited to be here, and I felt like I found my tribe when I met you, and I've just been introduced to everything everyone's doing here because it is really uplifting. Um, and it's, for me, this work that I've done, it started as like a question in my mind of what I wanted to do with my life that was meaningful. And I had no idea. And I spent 10 years banging my head against the wall. I couldn't figure it out. Um, and I finally started a podcast, and I was just like, I'm going to talk to interesting people. And very quickly, I discovered social entrepreneurship. Businesses that exist in order to solve some social issue. And it just kind of escalated from there. It
Now,
took me onto a journey starting my own social enterprise, kind of a side hustle called Wild Tiger Tees, where we screen print t-shirts with youth experiencing homelessness. Knowing nothing about working with youth, knowing nothing about running work programs, but we kind of jumped in and built something up. And this year we're trying to change it up and figure out a new way to take it so we can grow it. But it's just opened my eyes to a lot of possibilities of how people can start things that are making an impact, doing careers where it's not just about going to a job or, earning money, but also the contribution you make to the world.
so Adam, and you know what I love to talk about on the podcast and in our the narrative that we're putting together at the Goodness Exchanges, wherever you are now is important to whatever next. Whatever got you here is the secret sauce that'll bring you to that moment, even if you don't know quite what it is yet. So tell us a little bit about your journey to be right here, because you have a super interesting background.
Yeah, no, I mean, my life has been in technology, and um, I went to business school back in 2005, and I took a course called Creativity and Personal Mastery that got me thinking about what I wanted to do with my life. And um, I spent so much time just banging my head against the wall. Um, what I learned was that you have to get out and talk to people who are doing really cool stuff. And that's where you find inspiration and new ideas, because there's just so much amazing things happening in the world. And when you're exposed to it, it ends up in your realm of possibilities. Um,
And you were in a pretty deep world of academia, right? To wind up here. Where tell us a little bit about that journey, because I think you went so deep and found that that wasn't it, right?
yeah. Well, my work in academia was in computer science and technology, and then the kind of MBA route. Um, and I got into this technology world working in a bank first, and then in retail, which I still work running a technology platform for retail real estate. So helping national retailers plan where to put their stores, which is interesting, but it doesn't really strike a chord with me. Um, and so, it's one thing when you're doing something that you're good at. There's ways to make that more meaningful, but there's also, when you have an itch inside of, hey, I want to do something else, this life is precious. And it's like, how do you take that initiative to scratch that itch and really fulfill that? And so I think that's been something inside of me has always just said, hey, I want something more with my life. I want something different. I don't know what it is. And it's, the poking around and exploring that's kind of started to make things unfold. And it's interesting. I've talked to a lot of college students recently, and they're trying to figure out what they want to do with their life. And I realized that, when you're coming out of college or university, like, you don't need to know. You can just get a job and find things that are interesting, work with people who are talented and are going to lift you up. And these things evolve over time, but you have to stay engaged with that curiosity, like really digging into what's interesting in the world around you and what you're passionate about.
Yeah, I think what I know about your work is that you found a way to channel your curiosity in corners, to shine a light on corners that are going uncelebrated. That's for sure. Tell us about the difference between a regular business and a nonprofit, and then where the word social enterprise fits in there.
Yeah, definitely. I think for social entrepreneurship, what's really exciting is it's about applying business practices to solve social issues, right? And so you have the spectrum of companies where you have, on one end, for-profit companies that are focused on earning a profit, running their business. On the other end, you have nonprofits, which are running off of grant money to solve social issues. And social entrepreneurship kind of overlaps both of these. It can be a nonprofit or for-profit company, but it exists where, as a company, the purpose is to solve the social issue. So it's intertwined with who you are as a company. But you do have a business model. So you are generating sales and earning revenues that help support your mission or the cause that you're trying to support. Actually, I have a couple slides that describes a little bit of how this takes shape, just to give a picture for
Perfect.
it.
Do you have screen sharing capacity? Let me make sure.
It's disabled. Let's see if I can.
Okay, let me see if I can get it. All participants are now allowed to share.
All right, is that coming across?
Yeah.
So I've got two slides because I can't stare at slides for too long. But I think about this as 6 different ways that social entrepreneurs typically take in their businesses. So the first one is a hiring model, right? So this is a company that exists to employ people that have barriers to employment. Quite often, this is people coming out of prison who might not be able to get jobs, people who have drug addictions, mental health issues, or other disabilities that prevent them from taking work. So, for example, here in Columbus, we have a restaurant called Hot Chicken Takeover. They make great hot fried chicken, but they employ people who come out of prison. And it's not just about employing them, but giving them the support that they need to succeed and make it to the next step. With a hiring model, we found that, people need a little bit of extra support that they don't get in a typical company in order to be successful. But once they get that support, they can really thrive and go on. So a lot of companies exist for this kind of hiring. The second model is a one-for-one model. So this is a company that exists to give away goods to people that need them, and it supports them through the sales of those goods. So Tom's Shoes is a fantastic example historically for one-for-one, where they used to, for every pair of shoes that they bought, they would give one away. They actually don't do that anymore. They channel their money in a different way. They're still a social enterprise, but not in that one-for-one sense. So I usually point to the Aravind Eye Hospital, which is an eye hospital that started in India 20, 30 years ago to eliminate needless blindness, right? And India is a big country, tons of people who can't afford eye care. And they built a company doing cataract eye surgery where they give it away for free for those who can't pay. And they give the same exact service to those who can. And the only difference is the people who pay get better accommodations. So they have more luxurious place that they can stay in, but the same exact service. And they've really cool company doing that. The third model that you see in social entrepreneurship is an awareness and cause model. So this is where a business exists to raise awareness around an issue that they're trying to solve. So Amnesty International, I think, is a good awareness and cause model. Although I don't know if they really have I don't know what the revenue model is. We see it like here in Columbus, we have the Roosevelt Coffee House as a favorite nonprofit coffee shop. So they're an actual nonprofit. And all their profits go towards raising awareness around human trafficking, clean water, and hunger. And they give money away to those issues. So even though they're a normal coffee shop, they raise money for these other things, and they're raising awareness through the customers that come into the store.
Cool.
All right, so the other three models. So the other three models, there's an environmental model that we see a lot where a business exists to make a significant positive impact on the environment. I always think this is kind of wishy-washy of like, how do you know if you qualify?
Yeah.
And quite often it'll be, is the company doing something above and beyond just earning its revenues in order to make that impact? TerraCycle is a fantastic company that kind of embodies this, where they exist in order to find new ways to recycle waste, especially really complex issues, to keep stuff out of the landfill. A very common social enterprise model that's been around for a long time is the donate model. So think of that as goodwill, right? This is where people donate items and then they're sold or auctioned off to support a cause. So Salvation Army, Goodwill, they have really solid business models to take them forward. And they're really good social enterprises because they're able to generate a lot of revenue in order to do the good that they're doing. And then the last model that I put up here is a fair wages model. So a company that is focused on giving out fair wages to people that are livable wages and help raise up the quality of life. So my favorite example of this is the Mondragon Corporation over in Spain. They launched as a co-op in the 50s, a huge co-op where they are democratically owned by the employees. So the employees own the company, the employees vote on what the spread is between the highest paid salary and the lowest paid salary. And they have a lot of different companies. In many of the companies, the highest paid person is only paid 3 times more than the lowest paid person. So if you contrast that to like a typical US company where there could be a multiple of 1,000 or more, It's really neat to see that in a company where people are working together and collaborating, and people's efforts are worth, more of a similar amount as opposed to these really huge extremes. So,
This is great.
so I just wanted to share those kind of, 6 models as like, here's what a social enterprise can look like in terms of how it does business. But in terms of the actual impact that they're doing, that's usually varied all over the place. People often ask me what qualifies as a social impact. And I always point people to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. UN came up with a list of sustainable development goals to take the world forward. And they're usually a really good way to categorize what kind of impact you're making, right? So that includes things like poverty, education, equality, tons on equality, on infrastructure, on human rights, and peace and justice. But for people getting their toes wet and, hey, what could I do? If you Google sustainable development goals, you get sent to the UN's page, and it's really fascinating reading. Here's different ways that we can build a company to make an impact.
That I keep bumping up against people that I'm interviewing for the podcast about that mention the UN Sustainable Development Goals. There's that acronym, the SDGs,
Yeah.
and I I think if almost anyone, no matter their politics or anything, went and looked at those goals, you'd have to say, "Wow, this is a better world that people are imagining there." I don't think you could argue with any of them. I got curious and went there one day. I thought it was some lofty thing, but it's not really. It's just a lot of it's common sense, right?
They're very common sense. And it's a framework that a lot of people use. So quite often, if they're talking, people are rating the impact of organizations, they'll say, hey, it's solving this sustainable development goal or another. There's a few such lists out there, but I mean, I like that one because it's very accessible and
Yeah.
a lot of people know it. So it just makes it easier to communicate.
Yeah. Okay. So this is the kind of social enterprise, the kind of doing what you can do that you interview people in that genre. They're not necessarily special people. They're not wealthy people. They're just people who have found a way to organize what they might do anyway because they love it or because they have an expertise or both. They could be people right out of college who just never want to work for the man, right?
I have a lot of friends who fall into that category.
Huh?
I have a lot of friends who fall into that category, and they're like, I want to do something meaningful, and I don't want to work for a big company.
Right. And then there's that mid-career person who's been slogging away at something and has this nagging feeling that there's something they're uniquely built to contribute. And then it can happen to people like me who have a long, like crazy, fruitful professional career, then just one day go, oh, I can solve this problem.
Yeah,
Right?
no, and I think pretty much anyone, people come from all walks of life when they start a social enterprise, and quite often there's a passion or connection to an issue. So for people that aren't really connected to an issue, quite often they start by volunteering, right? They get involved in their community and they start to understand, hey, here's an issue that's happening and what people actually need.
Uh-huh.
For people who are more established in the community, either running a nonprofit or having experienced an issue themselves, quite often that leads to inspiration of like, here's what I can start or how I can get involved.
Now, so if you had to say, what is it like? One day you wake up and you say, I'm going to start a nonprofit, or I'm going to do this thing, which is what happened to me. I just started writing one article every day to prove it's still an amazing world. Threw up a little pet project website and launched in. But what I want what I would love to convey in the world is there are plenty of people who start what they're doing, right? Let's say in their work group. Maybe they work for a corporation and they go to their HR director and say, hey, there's this problem. And, you can start at this doing what you could do anywhere, right?
Yeah, I think the most success I've seen are people who started really small, right? They've gone out in the world to make an impact one time on one person. And through that, they're learning about what that person is experiencing. Um, I,
Yeah.
when I was recording my podcast before, I did an interview with Ann Bishop, who's the CEO of the Star House. The Star House is a drop-in center here in Columbus that serves youth experiencing homelessness. And they typically get over 1,000 youth coming through the doors every year, like unique youth. And they provide a lot of different services for them. Really fascinating organization and very empowering for the youth that are there. And when I was there, I kind of fell in love with the place, and I was like, I want to do something. And that led to this idea for Wild Tiger Teas and our work program, even though I had no experience. And I think for me, one of the difficult things starting off was I didn't have a really great context for what the people we were working with needed. And we learned on the fly, like we were there working with the youth. We got a lot of feedback from them. And what blew me away was that the population that we're working with is very diverse. Like people end up homeless in the youth in many different ways, under many different circumstances. And everyone has to be approached differently. Like when we're working with somebody, you kind of have to meet them at the level that they're at and what they're facing. And it was a lot more about building connections with them and giving them a space where they could talk and speak, than it was trying to come up with some overall system that would generally work for some of them. So my point is that we learned how to do that just by diving in and making an impact with a few people and then expanding it, repeating it and learning. Quite often when you're developing an idea, you don't need to know everything about how you're going to exist as a company that's super successful. You need to know, how can I make, the quickest impact and get feedback on that, right? What kind of tests can I do in the next couple of weeks to go out, do something for somebody and understand, hey, does this solve the problem? Is this what they actually need? Am I going in the right direction? Because through that communication, you learn so much, and it gives you just so much more clarity of like, hey, here's something that we could do in order to take an idea forward.
That's super important. I think we have kind of a culture of touchdowns. Like we all think that if we can't make a touchdown for someone, we won't even start. But life is such a game of inches. And maybe if you're just like a couple of rungs up the ladder from someone, you can still reach and get them progress in their lives.
Well, exactly. And it's these small steps. Like quite often we do see the big things that happen, it's and not all the small steps. I have a friend, she started a sister program to us. She runs a company called Petals That Inspire. It's a floral arrangement company. And she started working with the youth at the Star House, not really having a huge business model in place, right? So she would go in, teach them how to arrange flowers, and then she'd find a way to sell them or donate them to local coffee shops.
Yeah.
And she spent a lot of time trying to figure out, how can I build a business around this? And she found during COVID that one of the best ways for her to build a business that she could live off of was to do workshops and trainings for the general public.
Oh,
So she'll do, floral arranging classes, and people just love that. They come in and they do that. And for her, that gives it a lot of stability in building an income where she was able to leave her job and do this full time. So it's, but she didn't start with that. She didn't have to figure that out at the beginning. That's the point. she got it started small, doing a little bit of an impact, learning and adapting and growing. So, and Amanda's just a fantastic example of like somebody who's iterating and growing.
That's so, that's such an empowering part of this puzzle. The episodes I've listened to on your podcast are sort of mind blowing in that where people start and then over the arc of time where their impact lands is so amazing. But patience is part of it, courage
Yeah.
part of it, right? A lot of courage.
Well, courage too. Yeah. And some of it is just like that finding something that bothers you and that you are like, yeah, I'm going to do something about this.
Yeah,
Um,
that's funny. You know how everybody's always talking about finding your passion? What if it's actually the opposite? What if it's something that bothers you? Because you're the first person that's ever said that to me. But that's what happened to me. I kept having patients who I'd known as cheerful people my whole life, and their worldview was getting destroyed by the negative news cycle. And it bothered me. It bothered me that they would never see the world that I see, the generosity and the ingenuity in bleak places. Oh, that's a great way to look at it. All of us following our passions and trying to discover our purpose.
I
Maybe
think
it's,
if you stare at your passion too much, it's like, well, it's impossible to see because we're always changing and growing. Um,
I love that. I
Especially like I'm very indecisive. So, you know, I could try something for a day and be like, okay, that was interesting. The next day I'm like, I want to try this. And never getting anywhere. Um,
I think you've made a fun.
Curiosity and what's bothering you. I think those are two great keys.
That is huge, Adam. Super huge. Okay, and then you know a lot about, and you've heard from folks and have your own experience in what resources are out there to support social entrepreneurs.
Yeah, there is a lot of places, depending on what level you're at. So, like in college, there's a group called Ashoka, which is international, a very great organization for supporting social entrepreneurs. Um, there's the Social Entrepreneurship Alliance, which has a ton of resources um, and ways to connect people. But there's a lot of local things that go on in different communities. So I know here in Columbus, I know in Austin, Texas, I know in Portland, Oregon, like there's organizations which are there supporting local social enterprises. But typically a social enterprise is connected with other people in the community. So if you can identify a social enterprise in your community and talk to them, they typically know how that community is working.
Right.
So there's some cool events that started here in Columbus and are open nationally. So one of my favorites is called Give Back Hack. It's a kind of a weekend hackathon where people come in Friday night and pitch ideas of a social enterprise they want to start. And then they spend the weekend validating an idea. And it gives kind of a nudge for people to form teams and get an idea from out of your head to actually getting some real feedback from the world. And they have a high success rate of actually launching social enterprises, which is cool for a hackathon, which you don't usually see.
And it was called Give Back Hack.
That's called Give Back Hack.
Okay.
I love Give Back Hack. I talk about it a lot. So just because I've seen a lot of great things come out of that, where people come in not really knowing what social enterprise is, and they just have such a fantastic time connecting with other people and working on an idea that it opens up a new world of possibilities. I think it's one of those things where you don't need to know anything going in, and you realize, hey, I don't need any special skills, but working together with a group of people, you can actually accomplish a lot in a short period of time.
That sounds like it could be a load of fun as well.
It's very inspiring, especially seeing people from all walks of life come together and work on new ideas for things.
So before we sort of open it up to questions, tell me what you've seen over the arc of time as far as, so I always like to say that in the last decade, we've seen an undeniable and enormous wave of goodness and progress happening in the world. that nobody's seeing enough of yet. Am I wrong about that? What do you see?
No, totally. It's social entrepreneurship. It's been around, for 20, 30 years, but it was really kind of 2008 when the market crashed, where it became a thing kind of overnight. A lot of nonprofits lost their funding because, when the markets go down and people aren't giving as much. And they started saying, hey, what else can I do in order to keep making the impact that I'm doing? And so you've seen this fuel over the last 10 years of a lot more intelligence and support around how these companies can start. And in the last couple of years, there's been this new possibility opening up around impact investing, right? So people realize that, hey, if I give money to my local foundation and they give it out in form of grants, that's used one time and then it's gone. But people can raise money for an impact investment where it's given out as a loan with very few strings attached. So you're not giving up collateral. You're not giving up, you're not committing yourself to high interest rates. You still need to have a valid business model, but you can get these loans to help you grow a business much more effectively than going to the bank and getting a high interest bank loan or a loan when you might not have the years of experience or collateral. And for the people running these funds, it's great because they get a lot of that money back. So it doesn't just go out one way and that's
Right.
the end of it. It goes out, it comes back, you can be lent out again. And so you get almost a circular effect of being able to help companies grow. And that's an exciting area right now in the world of social entrepreneurship.
Yes.
So
Tell me a story. I want to open the floor up to questions. So please, anyone, put questions in the chat and we'll get Adam. If your wheels are turning and you're wondering how this works. The first question I would have to ask, had I not already spoken to you quite a lot about what you do, is this world of social entrepreneurship is not like quitting your job and joining an ashram. There's like a step-by-step process to it. Maybe Liesl said there are like two models of going from your day job to a side hustle to actually do something full time. Talk to us about that while people think of questions.
Yeah, no, there's definitely the model of I'm going to quit my job and dive into this full time. The same as any entrepreneur who's crazy enough to say, I've got an idea, I'm going to make it work. I've seen a lot of people with social entrepreneurship start in this side hustle route, right? Where you're building something at the side of your company. So you've got your day job, and in your evenings, weekends, you are connecting with individuals and building your business. You could be starting very small. If you're working with clients or making a product in your basement, and really getting the foundations for a business in place, and getting up to the point where you might have $20,000 in revenue over a course of a year. And you can say, yes, I can see how I can scale this into something that can support a full-time income. So people do this kind of side hustle. And I've heard this number from a few different places of like, if you can get $20,000 in revenue from a side hustle, you're usually in a really solid place where you could leave a company, scale that full-time, put your energy into that. Oh, you're mute.
So there's actually some metrics to help people know where they're at in the continuum.
Yeah. So I think that helps too. Well, and connecting with communities, right? So if you're starting a side hustle, there's so many groups that you can connect with, and just getting that peer support, whether it's a mastermind group or a local, startup grind, any of these entrepreneurship groups, whether they're geared towards social entrepreneurship or not, really helps people understand, hey, here's the things that other people have figured out from starting businesses, so I don't have to repeat their failures.
Tell me a story of somebody who comes to mind that was, totally doing the work day job and started a side hustle that became something?
Uh, my friend Jerry Valentine is a fantastic example. He was working at the Columbus Housing Authority, processing people on the Section 8 housing vouchers. And he was so frustrated that there was no system in place. Like there was a system, but it just didn't work. It wasn't up to date. It wasn't reliable. You couldn't match tenants with landlords. And he wanted to build a better system. And so he started working on that on his own. Um, and he finally got to a point where he knew if he was to really build it, he had to leave his job. He didn't really have revenues in the beginning, but he had enough of a connection and enough understanding of the issue that he knew how he was going to start. So he was not a developer. He had no technology experience. He's built a technology company. And the way he did it was brilliant. Like when he started off, he didn't, he was building this technology platform, but he was getting his revenue by doing workshops with landlords and tenants and doing kind of a concierge type service where he was going out, working with a tenant and connecting them to landlords. So actually doing the manual work of contacting landlords and saying, hey, do you accept these vouchers, arranging those meetings, and a lot of, kind of this concierge model of validating an idea where you're hand-holding, doing a very manual process in order to prove a concept, right? That was, I think, so brilliant because it gave him some income to survive while he was building the technology platform. It gave him also really great feedback from the community that he was serving. So he was actually doing business with the people that would be using his platform, understanding what their needs were and how they would interact. And I always just love that as an example of somebody who was like, I want to build a technology platform, but he didn't start with that. He started by, how can I make some money, and learn about what I need to in order to develop that correctly.
That is a great example. How about somebody mid-career who just like couldn't carry on without doing something that felt more like a contribution?
Yeah. Oh gosh, there's a bunch. The Roosevelt Coffee House, Kenny Sipes was a pastor for most of his life. And he got to a point and he was like, this is not what I want to do. I want to do something else that's meaningful. And he took a look at what he loved doing, which was buying coffee for people. And he was like, I want to open a coffee shop. So he did that, and he's been a real staple in the community, helping other social enterprises and helping support a lot of the efforts around human trafficking. Which he introduced me to kind of the scene in Columbus that's working to reduce human trafficking.
Yeah.
And so, it's great when somebody sees something and they get involved.
What about an example of a great second climber, like somebody that did something that doesn't even seem related to where?
Yeah, I hope I fall into that category someday, where I leave my technology development career for a social impact career. A great second climber.
Isn't there a guy in that you wrote? I was hoping you would connect me with him. He was in China when you and I first talked.
Oh yes, Rich.
Yes, Broadman.
Yeah, and he actually got involved more on the career consulting side, just consulting and sustainability, and doing work. So he started using his expertise, just doing business supply chain consulting, to focus on sustainability, and do projects around that. And apparently there's some really fascinating stuff happening in China, because they have so many people in such a need, and they have such a energy from the government to solve these big issues that they're having in their cities, that they've been able to make really great progress, which a lot of us in the West haven't even heard of some of these great ideas that they've
That's
come up with.
exactly the takeaway that I got from that episode on your podcast.
Yeah, I mean,
Is
I
that
was fascinated talking to him, and it was just like he's like, this news doesn't get out. People paint this
no,
picture of China and what's going on, and he's like, it's off the mark. The amount of change that has happened in the last 5 years um, in some of the huge cities in China is just,
yeah, it made me feel a lot better because the narrative that we get about China is so different from the one that he tells us about
yeah.
actually spending time there. So we've got a great question, I'm sure.
Yep. I see
Tanya,
a hand up from
unmute.
Tanya and one from Bryce. So Tanya,
Hi. I'm just wondering about any associations or um, accrediting bodies in this space. So, is there anything yet that people can uh, earn some kind of proof of social impact? And the counter to that is, can I go check a business out and really see, are they doing as they say? Or if I have choice, I would want to choose one that has the seal of approval. But does that exist?
yes and no. On the no side, social entrepreneurship isn't a regulated term. There's no body that says, "Hey, here's a certification to say that yes, you are a social enterprise." So anybody can call themselves a social enterprise, and it means people have to do a lot more research on their own. On the yes side, there is the B Corp certification, which is run by a corporation called B Labs, and they have a very rigorous process for determining, hey, are you doing efforts to increase both, the good that you're doing and the environmental impact that you're having? And there's some huge companies which have this B Corp certification, like Patagonia, and I think Warby Parker is also B Corp, for companies that people know. But you can go and go to B Labs and search through the directory of companies which have reached that certification level. It is an expensive process. So for most social enterprises where they're a smaller local impact, they don't typically have the resources for that. But there are a number of directories out there. So Our Good Brands is a company based in Australia that has a good rating system. In the UK, there's goodfind.io. Has also a really great platform for kind of categorizing, hey, here are local social enterprises, the impact that they're doing, and what kind of impact they're making. So you can kind of rate that and choose that. And there's more of those popping up kind of every day.
I think B Lab is the one that I interviewed a fellow who's all into the B Corps of the world, and he said that the B, and I've been there because a listener sort of made me made me walk my talk, and if you put B Labs in and then their search directory, oh man, rates them, and their transparency is the number one thing. So I do think there's a really trustworthy system for it.
Cool. And I hope they do become more accessible for the smaller entrepreneur. I know I'm somewhat in the travel industry, and it's really challenging as a small, medium size corporate to qualify. It's just, there is a barrier to entry. So I hope that expand, because
Yeah,
counterintuitive because I think all your stories are of really entrepreneurship that is able to gain great traction. So, but thank you. I will keep my eye out.
Yeah.
I spoke with this person from House of Eden Studio. I'm trying to remember what her project was, but she was starting a more accessible system for rating social enterprises where they would reach out and do a very light level of verification in order to be able to say, yes, they do X, Y, and Z. I would have to look to see what name. But you might have it up on our House of Eden studio website.
So, when we think about the scope of our individual lives, as we're sitting here when this broadcast was recorded, we're kind of, at least Adam and I laughed at the beginning before we turned on the recording, that we're at the end of the pandemic. Not because we are at the end of the pandemic, but because people have they're just done. I was at a basketball game last Saturday night, NCAA tournament, and gosh, my husband and I were the two that had the masks on religiously, and we're a little bit nervous. But by the end of that game, it was a 1-point game for a minute, and no one's mask cared. We were all shouting at the same time, thousands of people. God knows what's going to come out of that. So, given that we're there, we're in this spot where we've had 2 years to pause. I'm sure this conversation will sit on people who feel that nagging sense that we started out this conversation talking about. Tell us what those first few baby steps tend to be by your observation, talking to social entrepreneur after social. What are those first baby steps? Because I love to end a conversation like this, like, what do we do next with these feelings we've got?
Yeah. The first step that is common among most is being involved in your community. And the best way to do that is go out and volunteer. And there's organizations that really need a lot of help. And if you're looking for volunteer opportunities where, like, if you want to start a social enterprise, find something which is direct engagement with people in the community. By direct engagement, there's a huge difference if you're at the YMCA serving soup to people who are homeless or experiencing homelessness. Huge difference from that and being in the back room, stocking food at a food bank. You still need people who can help out at the food bank, but if you want that experience, you've got to be in a place where you're talking to people, and it could be volunteering with people who have mental illness of some sort, autism. It could be working with populations experiencing homelessness, poverty, or some other affliction. But there's always places to volunteer, and that's easy to do. It's fun, and it's a good way to socialize with people. That for me, I think, is the easiest way to get started, because when you're doing that, you're starting to learn about an issue in your local community. You're connecting with other people who are passionate about it and who know a lot, and those connections spark ideas and inspiration. So if you're stuck at where to volunteer, look up Habitat for Humanity and go bang out a house wall somewhere.
Do it. Start somewhere.
Can I ask a question, Linda?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I love this idea, but there's a point you talked about, lending, and it almost sounded like the micro lending model is now coming back to social entrepreneurs to be able to get. Is that what you were discussing earlier about finding resources and funding? How people would be able to, give you a small amount of money to them, and then it gets paid back to us. It almost sounds like the micro lending model that started over in India. Is that true?
Yeah, well, Kiva is a huge organization, and they do a lot of that, supporting local entrepreneurs. And I'd consider Kiva a social enterprise. I can never pronounce it. I think it's the Grameen Bank. Yes. That started up in Bangladesh. Just right. Brilliant model of giving micro loans to Bangladesh women to start businesses, right, and get away from predatory practices where people were basically enslaving them with the costs of the goods that they needed in order to make goods. Right. And microlending came in to actually give them an affordable way to build their own business and get their own independence. And totally, that's transformed this world. Right. There is a lot of that going on. Things are structured very differently in the US from other countries. Even the way Kiva operates, they partner with banks in other countries. And so they, I guess I forget what they said, they subsidize the loans, or they provide the collateral for loans, but they're typically done by the local banks on the local bank interest rates. Whereas Kiva in the US, people they are able to actually lend out that money from Kiva to give people that low interest and affordability. But I think that's an exciting way for people to learn what's possible. So like if you go to Kiva and look at the projects that people are doing in order to start local, businesses, like here's something small that you can do and grow. That's a great place to go. There's also a website called startsomegood.com. And they're like the Kickstarter for social enterprise. And they are so much fun to go on and poke around. They're international, all around the world, projects that people are starting in order to create a social impact. And, a lot of different ideas. For me, that's one of my favorite places to go to look to see what new things are people doing in order to create an impact.
Oh gosh, I'm hoping my team wrote that one down because I'm gonna go there.
Startsomegood.com. Yeah, that one's really cool.
That's lovely. That's so lovely.
Hey, Linda, have you hooked? I got one quick question. Interrupt you, sorry, but Mark Redmond and him ought to connect up.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I've got a great guy that you need to talk to. He's been in charge of the homeless teens, youth in Vermont for 40 years.
Oh wow! Cool.
And oddly as it sounds, his 2 interviews that I've done with him, my face hurts so bad from smiling so much. That guy can tell a story that leaves you about homelessness, that leaves you feeling like anything's possible. And thank you for mentioning that, Chuck, because I got to connect to Adam with Mark Redmond. You guys would just fall over a cliff. So thank you so much. Our hour's coming to a close here, Adam. It's people like you who also make us feel like anything's possible. I can't thank you enough over the scope of time. I'm sure that the Goodness Exchange is going to weave in and out of we're going to weave some cloth together. That's for sure.
Yeah, I love it. I love the organization here and everyone that shows up. So
you need some inspiration. Check out Adam Morris's podcast, People Helping People. It's story after story after story of people who went from doing whatever they do to doing things that they love and that they can't not do. They found what bothered them. I love this. I'm going to use this insight every day. They found what bothered them and they did something about it. They found their way there.
I love it. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so, so much. This has been a big happiness hour. Thank you so much. Have a good night, everyone.